It's easier to buy revenue than create it. On my first call with the owner, he was in Australia doing a marathon. Another call we had, he was in Asia. It's probably like 15 hours of work a week. I was in India last week and the business was running. $10 million in capital gain is excluded from capital gains tax.
Hi, I'm Kate Chichi, and welcome to Deal Diaries, where business owners share how they bought and sold businesses so we don't have to learn the hard way. Let's dive in. Most brokers will tell you to buy a business in your profession and in your city. Justin Hoskins did the polar opposite and nailed it. As an ER pediatrician in New York, Justin bought a marketing agency in Florida and financed the deal with his retirement funds from his 401k. Justin, excited to jump into your unconventional story. Welcome to the pod.
Hey, Kate, thanks for having me on.
So, Justin, you've been a pediatrician for over 10 years. Last year, you decided to buy a business. How did the idea to buy a business come about?
When I was working in the ER, one of my colleagues, he had started a concierge practice. And so I had realized at the time that like 90% of the stuff that I saw in the ER with pediatric patients, I could take care of in people's homes. So I tried to start a pediatric concierge practice doing in-home primary care and then urgent cares. In 2021, I started a practice where we did in-home care in Chicago. We had the opportunity to provide care for kids, and we could do x-rays in home, stitches in home, antibiotics in home, literally a mobile urgent care, COVID, RSV, influenza, strep testing, everything. So over the course of a couple of years, I tried to grow that practice, that business in Chicago from 2021 to 23. And then I moved to New York, to Manhattan. I tried to grow it in Manhattan as well. And it was very time intensive. Since I was an ER physician, I didn't have a patient panel. I didn't have patients that I saw every day like a general pediatrician would in their clinic. I didn't have a group of patients to just convert to this concierge practice. So I was starting from scratch. So it was a lot of groundwork, a lot of in-person stuff, and it was a lot of work. And so the business, it didn't grow at the rate that I was hoping that it would grow at. And then actually one of my friends was an M&A attorney, a guy that I met a couple of years ago. And so just kind of like listening to him talk about his experience of buying businesses in the summer and last summer in 2025, I just approached him and I was like, what would it look like for me to buy a business? Because he seemed to have a pretty great life. For the businesses he acquired, he wasn't that busy. So I basically had some conversations with him. There's a book that's called Buy Then Build. I started reading and I can't remember where I read it, but somebody said that it's easier to buy revenue than create it. And when I read that, I was like, man, yeah, I feel that pain because like creating revenue it can be very difficult. So that was the way that the idea to buy a business, it was kind of from just like a failure of a startup that I had that just over the course of like 3 or 4 years didn't grow to what I was hoping or anticipating. And so I thought, acquiring a business may be a better option.
Yeah, it is really tough to grow your own business. And it can be a little bit faster to acquire a business that is already generating the revenue that you desire. So given that you're a doctor, the typical acquisition path would have been in the medical space. Yet you acquired a marketing agency. How did you decide on what type of business to go after?
Yeah, so when I was talking with my friend initially, my friend who's the M&A attorney, he said, that he recommended that I'd find something in the medical space. And I had a pretty, before I did medicine, I was in accounting, so I had a background in business. And so we kind of just looked for businesses in the medical space because I thought with my medical background and business experience, I could have an opportunity to make an impact and find something that could be valuable. So I looked at some med spas. I found several in Florida, a few in Manhattan that were interesting. And as I was looking at the numbers for them and just what the costs were, it was like $500,000 for the equipment. So if I had one location and I wanted to open up a second, it was going to be $500,000 straight up to just get all the equipment necessary to provide the services that the typical med spa would provide. And I realized that's a lot that I'm going to be incurring for every location that we try to grow to. So I also looked at some medical billing, at some home health, even some hospice stuff. And there's also a lot of regulations in the medical space. And so that was one thing that when I was navigating that with my concierge practice, everything that you have to fill out and stay on top of, it was just a lot of work. And then with med spas, so several states regulate med spas, so that way only there has to be a physician that's part of the ownership. But that also, it's great being a physician because then it gives you access to a select group of businesses, but I also thought, whenever I'm trying to exit the med spa, then I would have to find a physician to sell it to. So it also limits the options that you have when you're selling it. So it could impact the price and the demand for those that are trying to acquire med spas. And ironically, one that I looked at last summer was still, I looked for just a few weeks ago out of interest, and it's still on the market. So like 8 months later, it's still on the market. I don't know that it's a great space. Maybe I didn't want to focus specifically on the medical space, and so then I expanded and just kind of was like looking for other options. So I found a consulting service business that was in DC that did a lot of government consulting, nothing to do with medical stuff. But I saw that as the business grew, the owner just hired additional staff to do consulting. And I thought, man, that's a much better concept. I like that opportunity to scale, to grow, because then you don't have to buy, $500,000 of equipment like the med spa. But if it's human capital dependent, then it's, as the business grows, you just hire more people. As if anything happens and the revenue decreases, then you can offload people as well. So yeah, so I decided I wanted to try to find something that was more in the service space and that was less uh, dependent on equipment and those things.
Yeah. That's really good to know for anybody considering a medical spa space, that you have fixed costs, very high fixed costs, and then probably the possibility for exit is lower, given that you have to find somebody who has the license, who has the credentials to operate in that space. And in the marketing agency space, it also sounds like you can more or less solve the problems with adding headcount, which is a lot cheaper than
A lot cheaper.
medical equipment. And probably in today's world, it can partially also be solved with all the AI and AI agent tools. Then we'll talk about that a little bit later.
For sure.
So you decide to buy a service business. How did you go about searching for the business?
Yeah, so I joined a group, SMB Deal Hunter, that had some business advisors, and they had a tool in the group where they just basically, this AI tool where a database that just scoured the internet and had all the listings for businesses for sale. It has like 25 line items, but it gets biz by sell, all the sites that have listings available. And um, I just started going through that database and like looking. We could filter it for businesses that had absentee owners. It also calculated the SDE, the multiple for the deal. So I was just looking through the spreadsheet and just I realized that I wanted something that was more in the service space. So I was just looking for businesses that were in the spreadsheet that were service, and that's how I came across the business that I had decided to acquire, this marketing agency, because I just saw it was just a listing on the spreadsheet that they had.
And what made you pick this particular marketing agency?
Yeah, so when I was doing my concierge business, but in professional school, medical school, law school, they don't really teach you about running a business, marketing a business, or growing professional practice. So when I was doing the concierge, I had reached out to a couple of marketing agencies about working with them and what it would look like to work with them. And so they said, I remember one of them told me it was going to be $20,000 to start working with them. And I thought, man, that's a lot of money up front for a startup. So when I was looking at this agency, the marketing agency that I decided to acquire, works with attorneys, and the fees were much lower. The rates were much lower. And so I thought it would be a great opportunity. I see a huge demand, a huge need for professionals to work with agents, marketing agencies, and professionals to grow their business. And the prices were much lower. The reviews were great for this business. The attorneys seemed to love the services that they were getting. It seemed like they were getting a good value for their services, a good return on their investment, and the margins were good too. And it was growing. And so I thought, man, this could be a great opportunity. Work with attorneys, and then also, with my medical background and understanding the medical space, seeing how this model had been successful working with attorneys, then pivot it and then try to work with some healthcare professionals as well after the acquisition. So I saw just like a ton of opportunity. The agency it's very efficient. The model for onboarding, for just like bringing staff on, has been great. So, that's what made me decide to go with this agency.
What is this model for?
They have a good mix of like local staff. So the business is based in Florida. So they have a good mix of like bringing on Florida staff and then also international. They have, some roles that are filled by people in South America that are very capable, and then other that are filled by people that are in Florida. We definitely need like a local team and people to handle some things too.
Yeah, it sounds like they do a great job optimizing the people that they hire. And as far as I recall from our conversation as well, you mentioned that the owner of the company was also spending a lot of the time working remotely, and
Yeah,
was one of the appealing factors as well.
yeah, that was super appealing. So he, on my first call with the owner, he was in Australia doing a marathon, and then another call we had a few weeks later, he was in Asia. Probably half the times we spoke, he was in Florida, and the other half he was not in Florida. So that gave me comfort, knowing that. And whenever, whenever we wanted to talk, his availability after he was only available between like 10 and 2 because it was important for him to spend time with his daughter. So he wanted to be home, available when she was home from school. A lot of the stuff that he said, he made it sound like it was a very low workload for him to carry. And then just like the way that it was interacting with him and seeing how he, where he was around the world, it didn't seem like the team was super dependent on him to be involved.
Did it turn out to be the same way for you?
Yeah, it did. It did pretty much. He told me it's probably like 15 hours of work a week, and I would say it definitely has that flexibility. Like I was in India last week, and the business was running, so he has a good staff in place. One of the challenges that I experienced, but when you buy a business, you don't get a chance to interview all the staff, but they did have some videos online that I was able to see the staff talk, and so I was able to identify that some of the staff members that were in leadership were super sharp people, and so I thought it definitely could be possible that the workload that he had was pretty low. That it was being an absentee owner would be just fine. So everything's turned out just has turned out great.
That's awesome. And I just want to note that you were in India last week and you acquired the business, what, like a month and a half ago?
Yeah, yeah, almost 2 months ago. So
2
yeah,
months ago. Yeah,
yeah,
most people I speak to that are 2 months into running a business they just acquired are heads down and spending
yeah,
24/7 in that business. But it's good to
yes.
know that there is a possible reality where you can find a business that has an absentee owner or close to an absentee owner and also inherit that lifestyle. Justin, I just want to go back to that spreadsheet for a second that you mentioned.
Hmm.
So spreadsheet is fantastic. It has like 27,000 entries of businesses being sold just over a few months. There's the revenue, the years, the countries,
Hmm.
descriptions of businesses, etc. But it is huge. How did you go through that spreadsheet in an efficient way?
Well, I got super lucky because I was just like scrolling through it, and I probably didn't spend an hour looking through, maybe a couple hours looking through it, and I just stumbled across this listing. So yeah, it can definitely be overwhelming, I think, to figure out, when you where to start. It's because it's like so much different from buying a house. If you're like buying a house and you're just looking in like one city or one neighborhood, but you're looking, if you're interested in being an absentee owner, then the world, you can get stuff anywhere. But yeah, I think I definitely selected for businesses that were absentee owner where that was an option. And then I was just scrolling through it, and that's when I found this listing. So I guess, it's better to be lucky than good sometimes. That's what they say.
You're a lucky man.
Yeah, lucky.
And what's the organization from which you got this spreadsheet?
It's through SMB Deal Hunter.
SMBG. Can you share a bit more
That's
about that?
so it's an SMB has business advisors. There's the lady that started it, her name's Helen Guo. So she has a podcast where she interviews entrepreneurs and people that do entrepreneurship through acquisition and kind of how like their experience and their journeys. I thought some of the insights that she gave into businesses, into acquisitions and things that she would review deals and like opportunities that were out there and questions and concerns she had about the business, and then also potential benefits about the acquisition. So anyway, I joined that, and they had advisors that were available, people that had just been through the process before or had made multiple acquisitions. So I really appreciated that. And then they also had, when I was looking at an agency, they put me in touch with a few other people in the program who had acquired agencies, and so that was also super helpful because I was able to just kind of bounce questions off of those folks, ask them what their experience was like. One of the guys I asked, before we were closing, I asked him if there was anything specific he wished he had known before he closed, and he gave me a couple of questions. He said he wished he had done more in depth conversations or interviews with the staff. He thought that would have helped him understand a little bit more about what he was getting into. But yeah, it was a really good experience, just to have people that had been through the process before to kind of just walk with you alongside. Because there's nothing like, it's kind of like when you have a baby for the first time.
Yeah.
It's nothing like it. You've never done it before, and people can tell you it's just nice to have as much help as you can.
That sounds like a fantastic resource. Shout out to Helen Guo. Going back to your marketing agency. So you decide that you want to buy this agency. Anything that you can share about how you structured the deal?
The business was growing. The revenue had been growing pretty significantly for several years. And so one thing that I learned, this is my first time through, when banks value businesses, they value them. They will say, you look at the last 3 years of tax returns and then kind of take the average. And then when you're using an SBA loan, they'll kind of, most of them will have kind of a similar number that they'll be willing to loan. And so because the business was growing pretty significantly, the seller wanted it to be valued, on the higher end. Um, and higher than some of the banks were interested in. So we ended up using a seller note. I think using a seller note is like almost every deal uses a seller note these days, it seems like, but it's super beneficial. And then you make sure that, meet certain criteria if there's a seller note that's involved, and make sure the seller has some skin in the game for afterwards. It just gave me some comfort to say, okay, this is going to be a good acquisition. This seller believes in the business, is not just trying to dump something on me. So I felt like that was a good thing to do. It definitely gave me comfort going into the closing and into the acquisition.
So you were able to satisfy the seller's ask for a higher price through using a seller note.
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
And can you explain how a seller note works?
They can be tied to like revenue. You can be tied to SDE percent growth. They can be tied to revenue. So I even read somewhere that it could be tied to, you may be able to set it up so that way it's tied to like employee retention. I didn't use anything like that in mind, but I think it can really be used as an advantage for the buyer, just to have comfort and know that there's a little bit of protection walking into it, walking into the deal. So yeah, I think there are tons of ways that they can be used to. And honestly, it can benefit the seller a lot too, because they can get a higher price for uh, the business that they're selling. And yeah.
Thank you, Justin. And
Hmm.
with a seller note, it's just essentially when you're not paying the seller upfront, but rather you're paying them over a period of time. So apart from doing a seller note, you shared with me earlier that you also use the ROBS structure. Could you please explain what that is and how it benefited you?
Yeah. So ROBS, it stands for rollover as business startup. So what you can do when you're doing an acquisition is, if you have retirement funds, if it's in a 401k, 403b, 457b, those retirement funds can be used for your down payment. And so, but to do that, you have to use a C Corp as the entity that you're going to use for the acquisition and to continue with the operation. So actually, there are two things I felt that were really advantageous, two reasons why I wanted to do that, because using the retirement funds, I was able to use my retirement funds for like 50% of my down payment for the business. And so I didn't have to pay any capital gains on those funds, and I didn't pay any penalties. You basically just move those funds from the retirement account, you move it into a retirement account for the C Corp, and then you move it from that account to your bank account for your C Corp, and then it can be used as your down payment. And so you don't pay any penalties or any capital gains on those funds. And then what happens is, the percentage of my retirement account is then issued essentially stock equivalent to what was used for the equity injection. But what's beneficial about that in the long term is then you have using the C Corp, you have what's set up as qualified small business stock. And so this is super beneficial right now. What happens with the C Corp and the qualified small business stock is that when you sell the business, up to $10 million in capital gain is excluded from capital gains tax. So it's super advantageous, in the long term. You do have to pay corporate income tax. The corporate income tax rate is 20%. And then the profits are distributed obviously through dividends. So there's no tax on the dividends distributed to the retirement plan for the shares of ownership that they have. There is then I would obviously pay for the parts that I own personally. I would pay tax on those dividends. But for the long term, if you feel like you're going to purchase a business and there's like significant opportunity for it to grow a lot, using a C corp and the qualified small business stock is super advantageous because then you don't have to pay any long-term capital gains up to 10 million. Then that's if you wait 5 years. I think if it's 3 years, you can exclude 50%, and 4 years, you can exclude 75%. You may have to check that, but it's something that isn't talked about a lot, that I didn't see talked about a lot, but just
Yeah.
using the ROBS and the C Corp and the qualified small business stock can be really beneficial if you have money in retirement funds tied up.
That's awesome. You're completely right. I feel like so few people talk about this. You're the first person from whom I heard about it, and would be great to spread the word that this is a possibility to use your retirement funds to finance your acquisition. Any downsides to using a C corp?
I think probably the largest is just like the corporate income tax that you have to pay.
Mhm.
So you just pay like 20%. And I'm honestly not, I'm only like 2 months into the acquisition, so we haven't even filed a tax return yet. So
Yeah.
I'm sure there may be a few more, but it's, if the business makes under, if it makes like 500,000 in revenue, or in like SD, it may not be worth, but it's more valuable because when you have, what happens is you get the corporate income tax rate is 20%. And then the dividends that are distributed personally to me are taxed at I think an additional 15%. So that makes it 35% for the tax rate. So if you're getting like paying 35% tax, but your profit, the SD is only like 500,000 or less, then you're paying a higher tax rate. But if you're making more, if the SD is higher, then it ends up being worth it because you're going to be in that tax bracket anyway. So that would be the only thing I would say. If it's a smaller business, it may not be worth it for the annual income tax that you'd be paying on the dividends.
Now that you've completed one acquisition, what will you carry with you into the next deal and the negotiation? And what do you think you'll do differently?
I think just the experience of going through the process, there probably are some, but it definitely would have been nice to talk to some of the employees ahead of time. I'm not sure if the owner would have been open to that, even if I would have mentioned it like, a week or two after we went under the LOI. But that would have been something that I think would have been nice to do. And then understanding how banks work, I have relationships with banks. And I have, I think just like every industry, every space, there are people who are like really good at what they do. And I encountered some people who weren't great at what they did in the space, but I found an accountant. His name's Josh Tonneson, who does the quality of earnings. He did a great job. I think that's the next one. We'll use him. I found an attorney that did a really awesome job, just a shark. I also learned, so the attorney that I use personally just charged me a flat fee. When we were working on the APA, it just like some of the things that the sellers attorneys were the um, addendums that they were making to the APA were just like ridiculous. And then after time, we realized that his attorneys were getting paid by the hour. So that was a learning point, understanding how the attorneys work. And I didn't bring it up with the seller, but that may be a way to just have a conversation if someone's involved in the process in the future. Hey, like I think that the seller that I was working with, it was the first time that he'd sold a business, so he was
Mhm.
kind of learning how the process went as well. But you could probably have a conversation, offline with the seller and be like, "Hey, do you realize that, these changes are not really beneficial or not necessary, just so you know, like these people seem like they may be running up with hours on you." If you have a
Mhm.
good relationship with the seller, I tried to have a good relationship with the seller, and just be respectful. And so we had a good, open conversations about things that we needed to, but um, I don't know that I would do a whole lot differently. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of work and not getting, at times seemed like it wasn't
Yeah.
going to go through. So I think that, persistence, if you find something that you really want, then I think sticking with it and going for it makes it much more likely. But my attorney, when we had some challenges with funding and I asked him, what's the chance you think this goes through? He was like, oh, probably like 25%.
Mm.
So, we made it through, but I probably spent a week like setting up calls with banks to try to get it funded and had several calls.
Why was your attorney so pessimistic?
I think, well, it's a digital marketing agency. And so some banks, what happens is banks they'll have a bad experience and they're like, oh, we like funded a deal for this restaurant. The restaurant like went belly up. They went bankrupt. So then the banks lose the money. And so then they're like, we're not doing restaurants for a while. And so digital marketing agencies have had kind of a reputation for, founder will grow the business. It's dependent on the founder. The founder has a great personality, good
Mhm.
rapport, and involvement with the clients. Then when they sell it, the buyer doesn't have those same skills, and so then the digital marketing agency goes under. And there also are no assets. So obviously, there's no equipment. Buildings are a real property or anything for the banks to have to the collateral for the
Mm,
loan. So they really have
yeah,
to believe in the business and the owner. So banks just were not, with all of those things, they were hesitant to be a part of the deal.
I see. Having no fixed assets makes it easier to grow the business, but it makes it harder to get the loan.
Yes, a
Yeah.
little bit.
How did you end up finding the bank to finance this acquisition?
I had to, so like the SMB deal hunters had relationships with several banks, and so they put me in touch with some of the banks, and one of those came through with for me, and then I actually worked with a loan broker. He also found a bank that worked out, that was able to do the deal. So there's a lot of research. I think if you just like hunker down and work on it, then you can find a bank. So the bank through SMB that I found, they were a smaller bank, and so those banks, they had a little bit more flexibility. They were willing to have like conversations about things,
Mhm.
and so bigger banks like Huntington, they're pretty strict on what they offer. And if you don't like meet the criteria that they have, then they're on to the next one. So if you have kind of a deal that's a little bit nuanced, then you may try to find like a smaller bank that may have some flexibility to try to adjust to what you're doing.
And what's it like to work with a loan broker, and what should people watch out for?
It's kind of just like working with a realtor. Like they just
Mm,
go and like shop your deal around. It's a pretty small, there's not like a million banks in the US that do SBA loans. He just has relationships, and he kind of knew what banks that he thought he could get the deal through with, because he'd done, hundreds of deals before. And he also had some good advice on deal structure and like the seller note that he gave me. So it's the more, if you can find people that are experienced and that seem sharp, I think just having those people in your corner is beneficial the whole way through the process, especially if it's the first time or just the first few deals that you've done, because it's just like a learning process. And until it's like riding a bike, until you can get on the bike, and people can tell you to sit up straight and pedal, but until you've done it, it's just not, there's nothing like it. So
for sure. Sounds like you had a really good experience with the loan broker.
hmm
What are the fees like for that?
so he gets paid by the bank, so he doesn't get anything from me. Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah.
And you mentioned that he gave you some good advice. Any that you can share?
Uh, the seller's agent didn't have a whole lot of experience with SBA loans. So the broker had just a ton of experience with SBA loans, and he had, and like seller notes. And so he just had, since he had so much experience, he knew all the variations, all of the
Right.
nuances, and all the directions that you could go. So he knew what would be approved by the SBA, and what we could do and what we couldn't. Because when you work with when you're using an SBA loan, the banks have an attorney, and
Right.
their attorney has to review the APA to say everything that's in this deal is compliant with the SBA requirements. So if it's not, the deal doesn't go through. So this guy knew, what would be permissible and what wouldn't be permissible, and so he was able to give us some really good feedback to make sure that what was in the APA, that what we were agreeing to, is actually going to be allowed. Because like
Mm,
that's the other thing, you can set up an LOI and everything in terms, and it seems great, but then the bank has
right.
to agree with it, and it has to be SBA compliant. That can even throw a wrench in things down the road. You may like agree to something and the seller agrees to it, but when you have the banks have to approve it and the SBA, then it can actually make things, you're kind of back to the drawing board, or
Yeah.
back to negotiating things.
Yeah. So the LOI needs to be confirmed by the bank in order for you to
Yes.
really be able to put the deal together.
Yes.
You mentioned that it was a lot of work. How long did it take from LOI to close?
Right. Yes. So I think the LOI we agreed on in early September. like the first or second week of September, and then we closed February 25th.
Mm.
So that's
Like
almost 6
5
months.
5, 6 months, yeah.
Yes.
Anything that took an unexpected amount of time?
Working with the banks, the banks are the financial industry obviously is like heavily scrutinized and regulated. So they just apparently feel a ton of pressure and to make sure that everything is done. All the I's are dotted and T's are crossed and everything is done. So it took time finding a bank, and then it took time, after you get through underwriting, there's just like a boatload of documents and things that the bank needs to have to get set up and arranged. So it's just a lot of there's a lot of things that take a lot of work. If it's just you, just like one person doing it, it's a lot of work to do for free.
So it's just the amount of paperwork that you have to get through with the banks.
Just paperwork. You have to set up. You have to get like business personal and property insurance. The business was in Florida, so like that was a little challenging. Finding people that wanted to do insurance in Florida with the hurricanes down there was a lot of work. I had to get life insurance. You have to like it's almost like you're starting a business from scratch.
Right.
But you're doing it in the course of when you are after you get through underwriting. I had to set up payroll for the employees. The prior owner was paying this company to do the HR, and they were charging him like 600 a month or 700 a month. But when I approached them about working together, they were going to charge me like 11 or 1200 a month, and I was like,
Mm.
that's a lot of money to 24,000 a year to pay for HR. So I decided to try to do most of it myself, which was a lot of work initially too, setting up payroll, onboarding the employees, 401k. So it's just like learning the systems it's not a small task, but I got through it, and I'm glad I did it that way, because now I can handle everything myself, and it definitely like saves a lot on costs. Definitely like the few months before closing were a lot.
For sure. But it's awesome that you learned how to do all of this, because also if you wanted to hire somebody else,
Hmm.
you know exactly what they need to do and how much you should be paying them for the hours they're investing in it.
Exactly.
So you're a month in, 2 months in to your acquisition. What did the first month and a half look like post-close?
It was a lot of, trying to build relationships with the staff. So it's like I mentioned, the business is in Florida. There's an office there, and obviously I'm in New York, and so I wanted to spend time with the staff. And I wanted them to think, I didn't want them to think I was going to move the business to New York or somewhere else. So that was my first goal, was to make sure that they knew I was committed to them being a part of the team and committed to keeping the business located in Florida. And so I spent the first month after closing, I spent every week I was in Florida, probably like 3 days a week, just like doing FaceTime with the team.
Mm.
And then, after the first month or so, it started to slow it down a little bit, but it was a lot the first several weeks. Um, being in Florida and just learning. It kind of feels a little odd to be like the outsider, the new guy, because like our
Yeah.
staff, there's been like, all the employees have been there 3 or 4 years. But it's, I kind of tell people buying a business is kind of like buying a house, except without going and walking around inside. Like you find it on Zillow, you see all the pictures, you have inspectors go look at it. And the inspectors, the quality of earnings people tell you what they think about the earnings. The attorneys look at everything. You can look at the Google reviews, you can look at LinkedIn to see what the reviews are. And so you can kind of get the picture on the outside. But, after you close, you get to like walk around inside, and it can be pretty similar or maybe somewhat different. But for me, I
Mhm.
felt it was actually better for, the team that we have is much better than I ever dreamed. So I actually found myself like wanting to be in Florida more with the team, because we have
Yeah.
a great group of staff down there. And I also kind of, I think one thing that they appreciated, the owner the seller that I purchased the business from, he was the founder. And so he obviously, had his hands in everything. He kind of knew everything. I'm the new guy. And so what I wanted to do was try to empower the staff, the people that were in leadership that I felt were doing a good job. And so that was one thing I really tried to communicate to them, was that I was trying to empower. I wanted to give them opportunities to make decisions. And they I communicated that, and that was one thing that they shared with me, that they were appreciative of the opportunities that they were have. So I gave, the prior owner didn't give them the leadership access to Stripe. And so I gave them access to Stripe. And then I was involving them in some office decisions and hiring decisions. So I think they felt like I valued, they definitely felt like I valued their input more as employees. And then we did like some team building stuff. That was one of the things, they had done before was they did an annual retreat. They did a cruise and they were concerned that that was going to go away because they have a good team culture. And so, the second week that I was there, I took the whole team to Top Golf and we did Top Golf. And
Mhm.
so they love that. So I think just like showing them, actions speak louder than words, like 1,000%, especially when you're like a new business owner with staff. So I was just trying to reinforce to them that I was committed to them being a part of the team and that I was, looking out, going to take care of them. And then I was committed to continuing with the work environment that we had they had been experiencing before because they seemed to enjoy working there. So I wanted to make sure that they stayed and it was consistent with what had been done previously. So but yeah, that was kind of like the first month. It's like learning a lot. There were, we have like a bunch of different platforms. And so obviously my background is in medicine. So I had to learn all the platforms that we use. And I'm learning some of them, but it's feeling like an idiot and okay to, feeling okay to ask questions to the staff. How does this work? But they're great. So it's been a great opportunity so far.
It sounds like you've done a really great job at empowering the team and continuing to create great culture. And the more you empower the employees, the more you can then be an absentee owner. So it works
Yes.
in your favor as well. And you were saying that buying a business is like buying a house. I was thinking it's like buying a house during the pandemic.
Yes, for sure. Definitely like that.
So your business is based in Florida and you're running it remotely. What's been key to making remote ownership work?
To me, it's just been just initially like lots of FaceTime in
Mhm.
Florida. The business is in a place where I like enjoy going to. So, I wouldn't buy a business probably in the middle of nowhere. And I don't know, like I don't have any friends or connection in North Dakota. So like I wouldn't buy a business there because it's like that's really far from where I live. Not someplace I'm going to want to go very often. But the business being in Florida, it makes it fun to go there. So, I think that's part of about being absentee. Like even though you're like absentee, like being in person just matters. And I've seen it with my team being there, and also just following through on things that I've said. So they knew when I was going to be there, and they knew okay now that it's being in India was okay for me to do because I told them, the first month I was going to be there every week, and then after that I was probably going to like taper down. And they remember those things that I said because they brought that up, and now we're talking about going forward. They're like, oh, we're planning, you'll be here in Florida twice a month, like you said. And I was like, yeah, that's what I said. That's what's going to happen. So I think making remote ownership, probably the biggest key is just like being there in person and making that time count.
Mhm.
When I'm there in person, I try to take them out to lunch and then we just do lunch together and hang out and talk. So yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity to having a business, an absentee owner business, running it remotely, as long as you're willing to put in time to be there in person.
Yeah. So buy a business in a place that is fun for you to go to. Justin, when we were chatting earlier, you shared that you're now looking for another acquisition and you're targeting the MSO space. What is pulling you in that direction?
Yeah, so we work with attorneys, and what's happening is kind of what happened in the medical field like 30 or 40 years ago. Like physician offices used to be run by solo practitioners on their own, and then hospitals bought them and kind of centralized the operations, or private equity did. So that's happening now in the legal space, and so we obviously provide marketing for attorneys, and we're able to kind of see, which firms would have potential to grow. And so what's happening now in the legal space is the operations part of the law firms are acquired and centralized. And so since we do marketing, which is like one of the larger components of the operations for a law firm, that's something that we're looking into. The next phase is like looking at acquiring some of the operations and creating an MSO for law firms because we have expertise in that area.
So you're essentially looking to service the clients that you already have in an additional way.
It's we some of our clients could be potential opportunities for acquiring their operations portion of
Mhm.
their practice, and obviously, so most states have it set up so the attorneys have to own the legal practice portion of the practice, but the operations can be acquired by someone who does not have a legal background. Obviously, I don't have a law degree yet.
And, can you just explain what MSO is?
Yeah, MSO, it stands for Management Services Organization. So basically, it's probably easier to understand with healthcare and with physicians. So if there was a physician who had a clinic and the MSO would run all of the operations, so that would be the medical record system, the bookkeeping, the nursing, and the staff, and then the office space, and the logo and the branding and all of that stuff, all of the operations. So it'd basically be like if the doctor just showed up, saw the patients, and then paid somebody to run the operations type. So we would be doing the same thing with the legal space. The attorneys would just see clients, and then we would fill their schedule with clients and then handle all the operations on the back end, following up with clients and getting clients to come sign up, billing, all of those things.
Thank you. So you own a marketing agency in Florida. You're still working in the ER in New York. You're looking to acquire another business in the MSO space. How are you balancing it all?
Yeah, I think I got lucky. One of the great things about working in the emergency department is it's like shift work. So I'm only doing like 2 or 3 shifts, every few months in the ER just to stay engaged still with medicine. And the agency, I got lucky. We have a great team in place. So it doesn't require me to be involved 8 hours a day. And it's honestly gives me through agency, I've already made connections with people who are in the MSO space and in the acquisition space. That's actually how Kate, you and I met at a
Yeah.
conference. So I think I've been fortunate to have that working in the ER and then this acquisition don't require a ton of time, and they give me a chance to just kind of explore other ideas. So yeah, it gives me time, and I think honestly, I get a little bored if I don't have something to work on. So obviously, like organization is huge. But at some point, I may need to bring on an assistant. But I think we're not at that place yet. But yeah, balancing time. I got super lucky with where I am in life.
Yeah, I feel like you're giving too much credit to luck and not enough credit to the way you organize things. When we chatted earlier, you mentioned that you had good systems in place that allow you to do
hmm
all of these things. Could you share more about that?
So I have ways to just track, okay, task lists every day. Like, and I have things planned out. These are tasks that I have to get done today. These are tasks that can wait. With entity, like I've formed several entities and like my background in accounting has helped out, like understanding how things processes work. Yeah, I think the other thing is being willing to learn and just like, stick my neck out. But yeah, for my concierge business, I like worked with designers and developers. So I learned about web design and I found this. I'm not sure if people have heard of Fiverr. It's Fiverr. But there's just like an online network or platform to find freelance talent. And they could be anything from logo design to web design to audio to like a vocalist for a song you want to record. But I think it's just like learning where to find resources to help with the next step. And so, yeah, I think systems to build and grow and learn. And AI has obviously been like amazing because now I can just type in, Claude or ChatGPT, like the question that I have, and it just
Yeah.
directs you to the resources too. But yeah, I get up and and I also work out every day. And that's, I think taking care of your body and your mind is super important to helping to stay high, to continuing the ability to stay high at a high functioning level, as well.
You mentioned that you use AI in your business. Can you share more about that?
Yeah, AI. Well, even in the acquisition process, when questions came up, I would enter it into ChatGPT or Claude and just ask about, how I I had never like had a business with a salesperson before, so I had questions about that. I put in Chat GPT. When people are looking at acquisitions, they're you get the SIM, the confidential information memorandum from the broker. You can just drop that in Chat GPT and say, "Give me some feedback and any red flags." And I found that was pretty accurate as well.
Mm.
So I think that's a great resource for anybody that's starting out. Just put the SIM and Chat GPT and see what it says, and then it gives you a list of questions to ask the seller or the broker. And in our business, it's constantly developing. So in our business, I think AI just gives our team much more capacity, and they can accomplish more things within our team. And so a couple of our people are really into using AI, and so I've just kind of encouraged them to keep exploring and seeing how we can use it. We use it for some phone calls. We use it for some email stuff, for some image generation. But I think that the opportunity is going to be endless as AI continues to grow.
For sure. When you say you use it for phone calls, you mean that you use AI agents to do the
Yeah,
call?
AI agents for phone. Yes, for AI agents to do phone calls for our clients. For like bookkeeping, we use Dext. It's a receipt that just kind of like categorizes receipts like an email. There's so many things that it does to automate, yeah, to make things easier. AI is going to change a lot of stuff.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Justin, do you have any general advice that you want to share on the acquisition process?
Treat the seller with dignity and respect the whole time and try to be a good colleague, and then read everything that you're given. And the APA, the asset purchase agreement, can be like 15, 20 pages long. And there's a lot of legal jargon that's involved in it. But I think as the buyer, what you want to understand everything that you're signing. So I actually used AI a ton, ChatGPT a ton for that. And I just dropped sections in. I was like, please explain this in layman's terms so I can understand. But there were actually several changes that I ended up making to the APA because of things that I caught in there that I felt were necessary to protect myself in the deal. So I would say definitely read everything that you sent your way, even if it's sent to your attorney, and then make sure that you understand everything.
Read every contract, and anything you don't understand, throw into ChatGPT
Right.
or Claude, and just
Yes.
throw the whole contract in there and ask for any red flags, as you mentioned before. Anything that you caught that you can share?
Yeah, there were just like definitions of things that I wasn't comfortable with that we ended up changing. And when we pushed back on it, that the seller didn't have any concerns with. And like some numbers that were not accurate, that if we would have left it in there, that if I didn't catch it, then it would have affected me down the road. So yeah, there were more than one or two things that I caught that we changed. And if I hadn't read it, it's obviously a legal document, so you want to make sure everything that you understand, everything is in your favor, or at least that you are understanding what's written, what you're agreeing to.
Quadruple check the numbers.
Yes.
I was actually just talking to someone who's done an acquisition, and they had some wrong numbers in their contract, and it's heavily impacting them a year later. So you definitely want to double check those numbers. Justin, it's been awesome talking to you. Who is the next guest we should have on the pod?
Tim Francis, who was at the conference that you and I were at, he would be a really good guest. He's an entrepreneur that's really engaged and involved. He has a great mind and just a great guy. So I'd probably say Tim.
Yeah, Tim's an awesome guy.
So my attorney Avi Ram, he's been involved with several businesses acquisitions, and he's done it himself. So he probably would be pretty good for the pod.
Yeah,
I can connect you with him.
It would be awesome to talk to him. Justin, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure to learn from you. Yeah, thanks for having me, Kate. Wish you guys all the best, and hope people have a great experience in the acquisition space. It's a fun journey.